Hi, everyone. Welcome to my channel. My name is Lisa Alastuey, and on this channel, you will find a variety of inspirational and informational videos. If that sounds good to you and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. My guest today is Cory Hageman, who is a bikini division competitor and a nurse in training. And I'm super excited to talk to her today all about women's bodybuilding. Welcome, Cory.
Lisa, thank you so much for having me on. Excited to be here, excited to get into some conversation today.
Yes. So I added a little bit of a bio at the beginning. Can you share a little bit with the audience about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So for listeners who aren't familiar with my content, I've been in the fitness competitor space as a bikini competitor for about 10 years. I turned pro, so I'm a competitor in the IFBB Pro League for the bikini division in 2021. Very competitive individual and looking to continue to excel my career, but really within the sport of bodybuilding and within the division itself, like things have evolved to a point where it does require some time off. So it's been a couple years since I've competed last. Kind of timed it to where I could finish nursing school. So I actually graduated last March. I still haven't taken my board, so I don't feel comfortable saying registered nurse. The colloquialism, I like to be really accurate there. But I did complete nursing school. Full-time coach. I own my own business. Largely what I do is consulting, coaching, consulting specifically for individuals who are looking to get more out of whatever their fitness efforts are. So both competitors, non-competitors, just individuals who are looking to really make sense of, their physique goals and define the best approach in a more efficient manner. But really the last couple of years, the content that I've put out is very educational and very specific to the pharmacological side of fitness.
Awesome. We definitely need more of that online for sure. Okay, so let me ask you about a current event. So they just added the Fit Model division. So what are your general thoughts on that, and how does it differ from the bikini division and its impact on that division?
Yeah, Lisa, I'll tell you, when I started competing, that look that they wanted for bikini, that's essentially what they're trying to emulate with the Fit Model division. And to give some context, when I started competing, I was 19, and I had many judges tell me, like, you have good structure, but be careful with the legs. You don't want the legs too big. Realistically, I was tiny. I was very skinny. And to be told at such a young age, with very little lifting experience under my belt, hey, we need to make sure we don't overgrow and outgrow the division, is very interesting feedback. So really what we're saying with the creation of this division, my thoughts are, obviously I'm not speaking on behalf of the NPC, the IFBB, but I can theorize that it's because the evolution of the bikini division has gotten to a point where even at the national level, there is a very competitive look that I don't think is entry level at this point. I don't think you'll hear any promoter, judge, or advocate for the IFBB or NPC say that drug use is needed. But as a spectator and fan of the sport, I will say that I wouldn't have a business if there wasn't a huge prevalence of drug use, even amongst, up until this time, what was the entry-level female division. So realistically, for, in plain speak, do I think that a lot of individuals who are just trying to figure out if they like competing, if they like the sport of bodybuilding specific to the bikini division, do I think that they're enhanced? Yes, I do think that there's a lot of enhancements being used. Used correctly is a different discussion entirely, but essentially this Fit Model division creation, I can theorize that it is one mechanism to allow more people to explore the sport of bodybuilding in a way that doesn't necessarily require a massive, and I would even say arguably a wrongful commitment, because it's not just the fact that they've scaled back the criteria of the Fit Model division, but they've also put caps on the suits, on the posing, which in my own podcast I did a whole episode just specifically on Fit Model division. I think it's incredible incredible that they are capping out the suit criteria and requirements. They're not allowing you to have these gosh, I'm gonna mispronounce this, the Swarovski like crystals, which, I mean, like, realistically, if for listeners who aren't familiar, we're talking about entry-level bikinis that are costing, you know, $500, $600, $700, even $1,000 at times. And it's like, if you're just trying to decide, do I want to get on stage one time and just see what it's like, that in itself is a big commitment. And past that, you see that there are very intricate posing routines within the bikini division and other divisions. So there, I would say, inadvertently is a need to also hire posing coaches, which, again, when you're looking at like a nutrition coach, a training coach, a coach to help manage your hormones, and now you have a posing coach, it's like, okay, at this point, like, you're spending maybe a couple $1,000s every month for someone who, you know, doesn't necessarily know if they want to be in this sport or to ever do this past their first show. So overall, I think it's a very big positive. I think it's going to allow more people to explore the sport of bodybuilding, and it also is going to, I would say, create a little bit more of a sustainable look. The actual conditioning requirements, I mean, like, we've yet to see this. So everything that I'm saying, like, this is all hope based on the videos that the organization has put out. Realistically, if they actually follow through with this, I mean, that's going to be determined once we see the division and how it's judged in actuality.
Okay, very good. For the audience that doesn't know, there's several different divisions in women's pro bodybuilding. There's, you know, the women's open, there's physique, there's figure, there's wellness, there's bikini, which is the most popular. I've been to both the Mr. Olympia and the Arnold, and every time the bikini prejudging took place in the expo, it like doubled in audience. Do you think that the fit model division will become the most popular for the women?
Yeah, you know, it's a great question. We saw a lot of backlash in bikini between the years 2014 to 2020, honestly, where it wasn't really a respected division. And I would say still to this day, 2020 to 2024, even though there was a vast difference in the look and the criteria, we're just now garnering respect from other classes. And it really does simply come down to the muscularity requirements now in bikini, as well as the conditioning requirements. Do I think that the fit model division is going to be as popular as the bikini division from a spectator standpoint? Yes. Do I feel like there's going to be a little turbulence in terms of how it's respected and its popularity amongst current competitors? I think that's going to take a little bit of time before really the idea behind it is completely understood, only because I do think there's a lot of ignorance from those upper divisions thinking that, oh no, these bikini competitors are completely natural. They just wake up and, I mean, like, yes, it's very much in the criteria that, you know, it's a very easy to attain level of muscularity and conditioning, but in actuality, in the look itself, that's just simply not the case. So I think it'll be interesting. I think spectator, I think general Gen Pop, I think they're going to be really excited about the opportunity to compete in a division that isn't nearly as hard to get into, especially for the first time.
Right, right. So what about transitioning between divisions? Will you see some bikini competitors decide and go the fit model route just because the aesthetics are going to be softer? There's going to be less pressure to use PEDs and so forth?
I do think so. I think that, I mean, currently my client roster, I've had a lot of individuals who are, you know, very, frankly, very far from where they need to be competitive within the bikini division, ask me if they should potentially consider the fit model division. And I do think that that's a fair, you know, exploration for them to make, what they're doing. And I do think that this is strategic. They're not allowing crossovers. So if you compete in the fit model division, you can't also do bikini in that same show. Now, One of the reasons for this is because I do think that there are individuals, there are coaches who would capitalize on that lower barrier to entry of the fit model division, potentially score in very objectively an easier win than technically winning a bikini like regional title. Have that athlete then go to nationals, cross over into bikini, get a pro card. Granted, I mean, like, that theory, it's not, completely flawless, but I do think you're going to have individuals who just, they take their, they go up to bat and they see how they fare in the fit model division. I think they'll do really well, but really the consideration I would make for those athletes is this a division that's going to allow you to continue to progress your physique if starting out right now you're already at the upper end of muscularity?
Okay, very good. And you mentioned the financial costs of competing, and only the top winners have the prize money. So not everybody on stage actually walks away with anything. With the fit model being a new division and the first time, is the prize money equivalent to the bikini division? Do you know?
I'm not sure, but I'll be honest. I've placed second at a pro show. The prize money is very modest, and that's understandable. But it does vary promoter to promoter. And then when you look at the Olympia level, I mean, I'm actually not quite sure what the bikini division prize money is, only because I've never qualified for the Olympia. So it's never been something that I dove into. It'll be interesting to see if they do allow that, but I think it'll probably depend on how 2025 goes once they start to work out all the kinks, because I'm sure there's going to be challenges that at this point they haven't necessarily anticipated. So I don't think it'll be till 2026 until competitors can technically compete as professionals within the fit model division. It'll be interesting if 2026 they then create that division specific to the Olympia.
It'll be really interesting to see how this all pans out. So we'll definitely be watching. So let me ask you about PED use in women's bodybuilding. How prevalent is it?
Well, let me clarify. Do you mean the women's bodybuilding division specifically, or all of the
professional bodybuilding? All the divisions. Yeah.
All the divisions.
How prevalent?
So let me just exclude fit model division only because it is the only one that they've announced. I mean, literally, I think the week of Christmas. Really, when we look at bikini, wellness, figure, physique, women's bodybuilding, there's a high degree of PED use. Can I say 100%? No. And there are very adamant bikini pros that they are still natural and they've never used substances in their life. Also from these same pros, I know that they're either on HRT of some sort. So I think really the terminology is very fluid based on what the individual deems as natural. I've had athletes that I've spoken with who consider themselves, they themselves believe that they are natural, yet in conversation they'll be like, well, I used Anavar 4 years ago. I'm like, okay, well, how are we defining current status versus lifetime status? So bikini, I would say, is the least prevalence of PED use. And then when we look at the wellness division and onward, I mean, you were seeing, I would say, very high risk PED models.
Yeah, that's one thing that I was really struck by when I first started attending these shows. And the bikini division is the smallest, least muscular. And I didn't assume they were taking anything until I started kind of studying it and hearing about it, researching. I was like, oh, wow, even at the bikini level, PED use is pretty rampant.
And it's, yes, within the sport itself, there is a high degree of use. But I find it just as surprising that even for non-competitors, even for recreationalist individuals who are just working towards physique goals, I mean, there is a pretty high prevalence of exposure even amongst fitness influencers.
Is that a good thing, bad thing? What are your thoughts on the use of PEDs?
I mean, from a very closed lens perspective, I think that we're all allowed to, make decisions around recreational drug use. But where I see this being problematic is that There's a lot of misuse. I would say, in a perfect world, if individuals were choosing to do things in a more educated and informed fashion, I think the use would go down dramatically. I think that there's a pretty big influence of, I guess, misspeak around certain compounds and what the risk profiles actually are. But I do think that competition is probably, at the core of it, the reason behind the increase in PED use. I mean, you have girls that are very much willing to do whatever it takes without really asserting, what the risk profiles are. And to their credit, I don't think that a lot of the people who I would consider are abusing drugs or are misusing them, I don't believe that they understand that they're doing that. I think that they're following the orders of their coach or, fellow competitor, mentor. And that's where it's something that within our segment as female athletes, there isn't a lot of discussion around the use. I mean, it still is very taboo. And, I understand it, I get it. Whereas on the male side of things, even within the entry-level male division, I mean, you do see culturally, socially, a very, I would say, solid and consistent understanding that even within men's physique, you're going to be using a lot of drugs. And just because you're using a lot of drugs doesn't mean that it's going to lend to getting you the same results. However, when you hear that other people are performing better or you're falling just short of the desired outcome, I think it's very easy to gravitate towards this facade that drugs are the missing link. And I think a lot of people fall victim to this belief and then ultimately just, roll the dice and then hope that that results in said outcome. And for a lot of people, I mean, it coincides at the perfect time. Maybe they do show up at a show, they look their absolute best. It was recent to the introduction of PEDs, but it's not to say if they had used things in more of a safer manner that they wouldn't have also performed as well.
Do you feel that women feel extra pressure and influence to use PEDs in order to compete at a high level?
Not compared to men. I think men probably, I would imagine that men do feel more pressure. I think there likely is the hope on the female side of things that they can, achieve set outcomes without the use of PEDs. But I think it's like you get knocked down again and again. You miss your placing by 1 or 2 points. You get a second or third and you miss that Olympia qualification, or you miss that win at the national level, and you just assume that, like, okay, well, the girl who beat me, she was a little denser, she was a little drier, she was a little harder, and your mind goes to, well, she may have been on PEDs. And if that's the thing that I'm not willing to do at this point, let me introduce it and see if it makes a difference. But in terms of pressure, I think it's actually, I feel like it might actually be the opposite, is that there's pressure within the bikini division to do it naturally, which probably lends to the fact that individuals don't feel as comfortable talking about it, because it's like there still is that, I would say, that connotation that PEDs are cheating, or that PEDs are an assistance that you don't technically need. Whereas I think in actuality, I think there's a lot of use that's happening that's flying under the radar because individuals are just very adamant about their natural status. Mm-hmm. In turn, it's like, well, okay, she did it naturally. Well, if I don't do it naturally, I should probably be hush-hush about it because I'm going to get flack from that.
Yep. Can you talk about some of the health effects that PEDs, steroids, so forth, have on women and the long-term effects?
So when we look at the classes of PEDs, and this is kind of how I like to explain it, we have AAS and non-AAS. And AAS, this is anabolic androgenic steroids. So that is any drug, any compound that is acting at the androgen receptor. And I think it's important for listeners to pick up on this, that like it's in the name, anabolic androgenic. So anabolic is simply referring to its potential to build muscle, its potential for anabolism. Now, that is arguably a wanted effect with the use. The second word in that name, androgenic. Now, this is referring to the masculinizing side effects that can, and I shouldn't really call them side effects because they are equally expected in, I would say, just as much as the anabolic effects. Now, there is a ratio of anabolism to androgenicity, that different compounds, some are more favored towards anabolism, but no anabolic is completely devoid of its androgenic potential. So within these classes of drugs, you can oftentimes see that individuals will use higher doses, or they'll even use modest doses for an extended period of time. And really the thing that I think needs to be understood around these supplements, specifically the AAS, is that you are always at a risk for virilization. And I almost think about it kind of like in a video game where like you have a little life bar ahead of you and you can see, okay, like I've got 10 lives left, and then like I have to start from scratch. In our case, we can't see how much runway or how many lives we have left. And in this analogy, I'm using like lives as exposure to anabolics before virilization sets in. So for listeners who aren't as familiar, virilization, that is androgenic masculine effects that occur with these drugs. So irreversible effects are going to be vocal changes, so deepening of the voice, as well as clitoral megaly. Both of these, once they start to occur, there's a very low probability that they will revert. So it's one of those things, it's like if you begin to notice those changes occur with the use of anabolics, it's not something you want to continue because it's only going to continue to progress. Now, past that, when we look at reversible side effects, we're mostly referring to hair loss, hair growth, acne. But I would say globally, the one that kind of flies under the radar is the suppression of gonadotropin. So FSH, LH, but this is largely what we're seeing within the sport is that individuals who aren't even on anabolics, they are also undergoing suppression of these hormones just from being in a state of low energy availability. So long term, it's like people want to make this correlation that like, well, anabolics cause infertility. That's a pretty big jump, especially when the state you're in to bodybuild, that chronic state. I mean, it's horrible for you from an ovulatory standpoint. And for listeners who might not know like what it means to actually ovulate, it's not enough to just have a period every single month. You can have a period, but to technically be anovulatory, we actually need to see that rise in estradiol and progesterone at a specific time during the month to ensure that you're having an ovulatory cycle. So when we look at anabolics, I would say a more accurate way to depict their impact on fertility is that they're going to exacerbate a state that you're already in from contest prep, and the prolonged use of them, yes, it does put you at risk for virilization.
Okay, very good. This is all good information if anybody is considering they need to do their research. And I do agree that there needs to be steps in place for better transparency, which you spoke about, because there's a lot of misinformation and so forth floating around out there. Okay, question about an article in 2022. The Washington Post did a huge expose talking about the sexual exploitation of women's professional bodybuilding. Have you witnessed or experienced any sexual exploitation in women's bodybuilding community?
I can't speak to that personally, no, but I can also say that I do approach this sport very professionally, and even though the sport in itself, like the division that I compete in, as all the divisions do, they require you to display a certain level of exposure. I think how you carry yourself is incredibly important, and I can say frankly, the inner circles that I'm involved in or I am connected with, the network I have, it's not one that has allowed me to really see this firsthand. And I definitely can honestly say with the Washington Post article, that wasn't one, you said it was 2020?
2022.
2022. Can you remind me, what were the claims that were made?
There was things with, when going on photo shoots, being exploited, asking to like lift up your top and remove your top for photos and then be blackmailed over it. And this was some claims of some professional bodybuilding women that they actually interviewed for the article.
Interesting. Okay. That's one I'm going to have to look closer into, specifically the athletes themselves. I'll say I've never done photo shoots that were private. So, I mean, like, I can't really say the photo shoots that I've done with the organization have been around a lot of people. Like, I mean, like even my partner at the time, like he was there to witness. And I mean, like, I can't say that I've been exposed to that. But let me look further into it. And if that's something that, if we run this back a second time, we can definitely dive into.
Yep. It was definitely big around like the Me Too era and bringing awareness and education and hopefully some women empowerment. What steps can women do to protect themselves? If there's any type of that abuse or harassment or exploitation that was taking place.
Yeah, I wish I could weigh in on that, but it's not something that I was as privy to. But I'll say, like, I've taken a long time off in between seasons. At the time, 22, I had just wrapped up my last prep. So I know the Washington Post came out. I know there were a couple of scandals too with like bigger coaches. But it's also something I'm not, I don't know if I should speak on just because I'm not clear on the specifics of it or the athletes themselves.
Sure. I was just wondering if you'd heard any like policy changes or recommendations or reporting mechanisms that were put into place because of it. It was national news and it was talked about for a long time. So I was just wondering if, as an athlete, you had heard anything about it.
I remember hearing about the Washington Post and the scandals that happened with different coaches, but thinking back to the specific claims right now, I don't recall those, so I don't want to weigh in if they're not ones that I can be 100% accurate on, which I'm sure you can understand.
Yep, fair enough. So let me ask you, who are your biggest inspirations in the community and why?
That is a great question. Well, I'll say like my earliest influence was probably Lane Norton. This was prior to getting into the sport. At the time, I mean, he was very open about really, I would say, the miseducation around nutrition related to bodybuilding. And from a nutrition standpoint, this was something that I had seen firsthand. A lot of coaches were very generic with their nutrition protocols and very stubborn. Yeah, so I mean, like early on, 18, 19 years old, like tuning into his content and getting to learn directly from him. I mean, that was, I would say, a huge leg up, as it was my first exposure to someone who is really going against the grain and challenging the norm. I would say past that, I mean, like it'll sound like I'm blowing smoke, but the influence my partner, Jordan Junta, has had on my really career path relative to training. This is one that really in the last year I've been able to lean into very heavily, and I've been able to learn a lot from him. So Jordan, he owns a company within the fitness space. It's an educational company that specifically focuses on biomechanics and functional anatomy, and I really appreciate that as a bikini athlete, as someone who is more risk averse, who doesn't want to experience virilization, being able to get the most out of my programming and really hone in on the domain of training, and I guess I would say making progress in ways that up until this point I assumed, okay, well, I'm probably just going to have to use PEDs or use them in a way that I haven't previously in order to achieve those same results. So it's been incredible. I mean, to have him in my corner and have him managing my coaching fully. John Jewett, he's another big influence in my career path within bodybuilding. I mean, like J3U has been an incredible resource for listeners who are familiar with really my, I guess, upcoming or turning point within the sport. I coached with J3U for about a year. I was the head of female coaching, and I mean, working with John, like I was able to learn a lot and really get different insight into the sport itself.
Okay, very good. So like in the male bodybuilding, people love to talk about who's the GOAT, who's the greatest of all time. And a lot of times like Ronnie Coleman's name comes up. Sometimes people say Arnold Schwarzenegger because of his legacy and all that he's done. In the women, who would you say is the GOAT?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. I mean, Sid Gillis. Oh gosh, that's so embarrassing. I'm messing this up. She just retired on a hell of a winning streak. So I mean, specifically for figure, she is one that we can't deny. You know, really holds, I guess, has a foothold within the division and consistently nailing that. Past that, let me say, I mean, like Franchella in wellness, I mean, like she held a pretty hefty reign, but I think it's amazing that Issa was able to make such vast improvements in her physique. I mean, like seeing where she was in 2020 when the wellness division started, or maybe I'm mixing that up, 2021. Gosh, like the density that she was able to put on her physique was just incredible. But within bikini, I mean, like as much as I would love to give the crown to one girl specifically, I mean, a lot of these girls are my friends, and frankly, I am, you know, a fan, like truly at its core of the definition. I'm a fan of their competitive journeys. I mean, I think Ashley Kay is remarkable and has done such an incredible job continuing to evolve with the division, which is, I mean, like incredible to see now that they're kind of modeling the fit model division specifically out after her original physique. So, but to see the improvements that she's made really at the turning point when bikini started to require more muscle, I mean, I think it's really commendable. But a lot of those top girls, I am just so amazed with the consistency and the progress they've been able to showcase the last several years.
Okay, very good. Okay, so let's talk about coaching in women's bodybuilding. There was a video posted the other day by Tarek El Gundi from the Mr. Olympia, and he was talking about how a lot of online coaches are con artists. And I thought, wow, and it went viral, you know, because he is pointing out that sometimes people, you know, pose as coaches and they have never competed. They have a high school education, but they're out there generating business because people maybe aren't doing their research. So let me ask you about specifically coaching women. What are your thoughts on, you know, men coaching women and just the whole coaching business for women's professional bodybuilding?
So I think at the professional level, I think it's a much different game than the amateur level. I think there are coaches who, you know, have worked with athletes from an amateur level and have, you know, seen that inception of them turn pro and then perform really well at the pro level. I think what's needed at the amateur level is different than the pro level. So what I see, you know, from my vantage point is that there are a lot of individuals who maybe turned pro with the coach. However, at the pro level or after their first season, were able to, you know, take some time, reflect, and really reconsider, you know, whether their needs are fully being met. I can tell you the kind of athlete I am. Like, I've been self-coached pretty much most of my career. I've had a few coaches, but my needs, I would venture to guess, are very different than a different athlete's needs, and then in some ways are identical. So really finding a coach that matches what those needs are, I think starts with being very clear on what kind of athlete you are. So being a coach myself, it's very rare that there isn't a good matchup, but this is something that I try to safeguard both my time and the client's time with doing a free 15-minute consultation before anyone signs anything, before any payment is collected. I actually make it impossible for clients to pay me for coaching before we do this call, and it's for this reason specifically. If I can't meet those needs, I don't want someone to hire me, and I want to be very clear on what it is they're looking for. So during that interview process, I'm specifically going over aspects that I know people I hear complain about. That can be communication, dietary style, expectation, turnaround times. Now, I'll say that like I do expect a lot out of my clients, and this is something that I'm very straightforward with, is that if that is intimidating or in turn makes it necessarily too difficult for you to adhere, it might not be a good fit, but at the same time I can give you references of different people that you can reach out to who might be a better fit. So my personal approach is I do try to take more of a collaborative, I would even say team player, I'm blanking on the word. I would rather see other coaches that I respect and I think do a really good job. I'd rather see them bring a new client on knowing that like, okay, this client might not be a good fit for my coaching style as opposed to theirs. There isn't that level of competition I see with other industries where it's like I need to sabotage someone else's, potential lead. Now, related to coaches who are inexperienced, related to coaches who are, potentially just grimy, just very unethical, or who are doing things that I would say even in the male-female dynamic are very, just blatantly wrong. I think I can only speak to my experience working with male coaches. There's never been a time where I felt like I needed to assert a boundary around what was professional or not, because that was the standard that was set out the gate. I have heard from different girls, different competitors, and I've also spoken with male coaches that those lines can become very blurred. And this is where I find it interesting, is that there are a lot of athletes who inadvertently are blurring those lines themselves. So I think that's where really how the coaching relationship is approached when working with a male. It needs to be a standard that you set as an athlete. That would be like, I guess, really my advice, is that you set and you uphold. So if there's any point where you feel like under any circumstance, like it doesn't have to be that the coach did something egregious. Like if you feel like what they said was not appropriate, you need to voice that. And if that means you're not working with this coach, amazing. That means that relationship is stopped immediately before something worse happens. But for the individuals that I know, that I trust and respect, I'm like, those male coaches, like they have a very clean track record, and that's not unintentional. They've made it a part of their business models that I'm not going to meet athletes in the room. I'm going to meet them down in the lobby. It's going to be very structured. There's going to be a paper trail, and there's going to be interaction that is appropriate, so that if there was ever any question of my intentions or my communication style, it was very clear that I guess I should say this, there was no question as to whether that professionalism was being upheld.
Okay, very good. So let me ask you about mental mindset, motivation with regards to coaching. How do you prepare your athletes, especially for competition and on stage? Like, how do you prepare the mental aspect?
So that I answer this concisely, can you give me an example of like the type of client you're referring to?
So like somebody who's going to compete in their bikini division for the first time. And so they're having to stay motivated training. How do they handle their anxiety when getting on stage fright, people looking at them, the judges, all of those self-conscious things that, play mental gymnastics in someone's head.
Okay, gotcha. So you're saying someone who isn't necessarily comfortable with like the act of competing, of getting on.
Right, the mental side of it. Yeah.
Right.
How do you toughen up the mental side so that they are prepared for that?
It's a good question. I will say most of the athletes I work with, there are a level of nerves that are expected, and I actually see it as a good thing. It shows they care, and I think ultimately, like being very honest and owning those feelings as they come, I think that's really your starting point. I will say that the more prepared I am, the better I feel on stage. It doesn't alleviate necessarily those nerves, and those jitters, are certainly going to come, but being in that setting was very new to me. I didn't like being the center of attention. The level of exposure that you have on stage, I mean, is pretty stark for most people. So when I first started competing, I don't think that necessarily I was as prepared for what that would feel like, and it definitely showed. But looking back, I think after the fact, I was able to collect, some ideas around, okay, well, why did that happen, or what things were going through my mind specifically. And the one that stood out to me a lot was the posing, is that I wasn't very comfortable walking in heels. I wasn't very comfortable with my body, like putting it in specific poses and hitting these poses and knowing what to do. So I'm very honest with clients, like, you're going to mess up. You're not going to nail your routine probably the way that you've practiced it, because you're going to have a lot of adrenaline rushing through you. You're probably going to be somewhat off pace with the way that the show is being expedited, because it can be a little chaotic backstage. What you need to do is try to just focus on the things that are in your control. So no silly mistakes, no being late to getting backstage, being very aware of your surroundings and when the expediters are calling your class. All of those things are in your control. Planning your makeup and hair and tan accordingly, so that the amount of girls who have missed their prejudging because their makeup artist has ignorantly put their appointment way too close to their show time. So really, I think on the organizational side, being as prepared as you can the day before and knowing that what that'll look like, being very clear on okay, so on show day itself, you're going to get on stage, you're going to do probably an individual routine, but they might last minute just tell you hey, we're bringing you out in groups, then it's going to be individual, then it's going to be call outs. I think kind of walking them through that aspect is helpful, but every show is different. And I can say some athletes, they work with posing coaches one-on-one. So in that case, it's that coach might be a little more hands-on with the specific poses that that individual needs to work on. But I think for one, being in shape, I think that's a huge thing that can alleviate some of those nerves. Being in shape in time, so not rushing those final few days to get the last bit of body fat off. And then also just making sure that they are confident in the process, to make sure that they had a good experience during prep. So yes, mindfulness, stress management, that is going to be a huge component of what you need, I would say, to be successful from an intrinsic standpoint. But how the athlete manages stress, and I would say this is very individualized, that's going to give me clues into what areas I need to help them work on more so leading up to show day.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I've witnessed where, a competitor comes out and their whole body is shaking, involuntarily, they can't stop shaking and they're on stage. Have you ever had that happen with one of your athletes?
Oh, yeah. No, I've had that happen with several athletes. I've had that happen with myself. I'm sure the next time I compete, I'm going to be nervous just because I've been, you got to shake off that ring rust. And I think it's something that the more times you do it, the more comfortable you are. I think at this point now, when I get on stage, it's they could ask me to do a cartwheel and it's okay, cool. Yeah, whatever y'all throw at me, I know what I'm supposed to do. I know that it's probably not going to go according to the schedule that they lay out. And as long as I'm in shape and I know generally how to hit my poses and I feel comfortable moving in heels and moving in that environment, even if I mess it up, the worst that happens, you stumble, okay? You stumble. No one's going to remember it. And I think that's where if you can really focus on being present and not put yourself 2 steps ahead of where your feet actually are, I think you're going to be better off for it.
Yep. Good advice. So what about dealing with the aftermath, not feeling rejected, taking it personally, and also dealing with the post-competition come down?
I think this is going to be something that on some level you have to accept will happen. I think for even very tough individuals, it's very similar to getting married, having a child for the first time, or I guess really any time. You have all this adrenaline and excitement leading up to a specific moment. And after the fact, you're in a transition phase. Things are shifting physiologically, things are changing. and you are quite literally moving into a different season, a different direction with your physique, that you were frankly rewarded on moving in the opposite direction. So the fact is, like, you can't maintain that level of leanness year round. I mean, it's not suitable for anyone. Yet you're going to want to, because for the last several months you've been in a position where you've been affirmed, you've been, encouraged, and like you've put everything you have into achieving that physique, and now it's over. And now you're told that like you can't really do this for a little bit of time, and that little bit of time is still going to seem like it's way too long, even if it's a very short horizon. So I think accepting that the phase itself, it serves its purpose. The physique itself, is beneficial for getting on stage. But past that, it is not conducive with you making progress. And really, for myself, what I find has been helpful is focusing on being a better competitor, which typically means putting on muscle, which means putting on body fat, which means finding some kind of re-regulation of my hormones post-show. It also means letting off the gas pedal a little bit when it comes to just how in you were to your prep. Now, that's going to be uncomfortable, because I think a lot of people, they want to sustain that, all in, horse blinders on mentality, but you're not actually going to be better for sustaining that. And I think it's something that, until you go through it yourself, you can hope that like, oh, well, I'll be the exception. I'll reverse diet perfectly and stay within, 3 to 5 pounds of my stage weight. You can do that. You could physically do that, but not without consequences. And that's the point I think I really like to highlight for athletes, is that you have a whole life to live outside of this. And just because you're living your life, it doesn't mean you have to revert back to, habits and even a physique that you don't feel is in line with your goals. But it does require not being stage late.
Yep. One good example of that, Jennifer Dory, she won the bikini division 2 years ago, Mr. Olympia bikini division. And if you see a picture of her, the face is gaunt. She looks completely different, 1 year later, looks like she's put on, a healthy amount of weight. She looks like two different people if you look at her competition and what she looks like on Instagram.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I think Jennifer is a very good example of someone who strikes a very healthy balance between her body fat percentage on the stage and off stage. She seems like someone, I would say that, big fan of Jen, by the way. I think she represents that fluctuation extremely well in a very realistic way, whereas I do think it's a shame that some competitors kind of find themselves trapped in that stage lean physique, and even once they're off stage, even once they're out of their competition season, they're still competing with other girls on Instagram, trying to stay the leanest, trying to stay within striking distance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's a really good example of, the feminization coming back once you get off of the post-competition cycle, because she's put on that healthy amount of body fat that's needed for reproduction and so forth. So anyway, I just recommend everybody go check out her Instagram to kind of see the vast difference between competition look and like real world look.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there is a lot of pressure with athletes who garner big followings to sustain a look that is marketable. And I think Jen just does an incredible job representing what it is to be a competitor, without it appearing like, from an outward perspective, obviously, that she's having, to sit the bench on living her life and finding some normalcy.
Yep. Well, we're getting here toward the end. Can you share with the audience how they can find you and any future projects, goals, things that you have going on?
Amazing. Lisa, thank you so much for this. This has been great. For listeners who want to take a look at my content, my handle is Cory_Fit, CORY_FIT. I have my own podcast, the Self-Selecting Podcast, on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. I also have Patreon, where you have access to exclusive content, educational content on both tiers 1, 2, and 3. So I guess all 3 tiers, as well as 4 bonus episodes of the podcast on tier 3.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you, Cory. I appreciate you coming on my channel today. And if you guys like this video, be sure to leave a comment down below and give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, Cory.